Hey guys, welcome to lesson number 21. We're just sort of getting to grips now with the values in this face. I've not gone on too much further from the last lesson. We started out obviously with the grid method, which is it's a useful method. Like I said in earlier videos, it's not my favourite. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to continue adding some values in this cheek area here. Now this highlighted area here, I really want to bring that out, so we're going to have to really ramp the value up, probably going up into a 2B in a lot of these areas and layering with the HB. So starting with my HB pencil, I'm just going to again just start bringing some of the value out. And I said last time about the importance about making sure that we keep this edge here very dark, just so that we don't lose this definition of the side of the face and the cheek. It's very easy when you are laying the graphite down in these stages, it's very easy to lose track of where your darkest areas and edges are. So it's something that I do keep talking about quite regularly, which is make sure that you do keep refining and defining those darkest edges, and also the highlights as well. As we start getting into this cheek area in this zone, we will be using our kneaded eraser to keep bringing that out. And it's a constant process of going over the dark areas, going over the light areas. So I really want to try and get as much of this face done as we can today, so that the next couple of lessons we can really spend some valuable time on the hair and talking about the hair and how we create something that looks quite realistic or very realistic, and trying to get as much detail in there as possible. So I'm just bringing this HB out now. It's been really interesting seeing some of your work over on the page. I've really enjoyed looking at some of your progress, and even some of the newer members that are going back to lessons 1 to 6 doing the barrel and the sphere. It's all good practice. I'm really sort of enjoying how the group's taking shape, and we've not got any negativity in the group. People are starting to share their work, which is fantastic. We did have a bit of a discussion a few days ago about how some of the other art groups over on Facebook are starting to almost fall apart at the seams, with people arguing and falling out. And I was just saying to a few of you how nice it is to wake up of a morning and see nice messages and lovely comments from you guys. So keep it going. For those of you that haven't dipped into the Facebook group, try and find us. It's called Tutorial Tuesdays Beginner to Pro. Request to be added to that, and I will be sure to add you. And it's a really nice place for you to see all of these videos. So I keep posting these videos that I'm releasing on the Facebook page, but also you get your opportunity there to show us what you're doing, show us some of your work, whether it's from the videos or the tutorials or not. It's brilliant to see what some of you are producing. We've got some fantastic artists in there. We've got a lot of beginners as well, and I really like that we've got some brilliant artists in there that are willing to chip in and give some advice, and people are actually starting to learn something. And I think it's very important that we do keep that sort of message going, that we're all learning. Nobody's the finished article. I think the minute that you think that you are fully accomplished in some area is the moment that you start to fail. So I'm using what's called the tapered stroke here. For those of you that don't know what the tapered stroke is, what I'm doing is I'm doing a series of pulling towards me lines. I know on the video, on the actual screen itself, it probably looks as though what I'm doing is scribbling. So I'm going up and down in an up and down fashion, but I'm not. What I'm doing is I'm taking the pencil onto the paper by pulling it towards me, and then I'm lifting it off and going back to the top. And hopefully what we get there is we get a thinner start to the line and a thinner end to the line, and in the middle we've got a nice stroke, and we build those strokes up. It's almost a cross hatching, but what we're doing is we're building layers up in the paper. So one of the first techniques that I learnt over 3.5 years ago now is you build the value up. So you don't just grab a 2B pencil and just bear down the 2B pencil and that'll be your value, let's say in this darkest area. This dark value here is built up with a combination of 2H, HB, 2B, we'll go up into a 4B, maybe even a 7B. And it's that gradual building up of the value that gives us this lovely smooth look to it, rather than a harsh or grainy look, which you sometimes see. One thing that I also do try and teach is we don't use any blending stumps, we don't use tissue papers or Q-tips. We might occasionally use a brush. A very soft makeup brush will do. And the reason for that is these blending tools tend to flatten the tooth of the paper, give us a terrible graphite shine, which is where the areas that you've been drawing on, the particles of the graphite sit so flat that when you bear down on them, you then create a kind of reflective surface. And what this does is it just makes your drawing look very unrealistic and not something that's easy on the eye from certain angles. So this method of layering and being very, very soft and delicate with your stroke avoids that. Not completely, you're never ever going to totally avoid it working with graphite. If you want to completely avoid any shine at all, you want to be using a charcoal. You can get some of these pencils. I use a pencil occasionally. I don't think I've got one with me at the minute, no. They're in the cupboard. I use something called wolf carbon, which I guess is a sort of a hybrid charcoal. It's like a pencil. It sharpens like a pencil. You can layer, but you get very dark blacks with it. But the particles that come off are not as smooth. They're a much rougher texture. So what you get is you get a very dark black, a very deep black, but you don't get any of the graphite shine that's associated with getting that type of tonal value with a graphite pencil. So what I'm also now doing is I'm going over now with a 2H pencil in some of these darkest areas, and it's this layering effect that we're looking for. I'm using the harder pencils to get down into the tooth of the paper. The particles that come off of a harder pencil are much smaller, and with the smaller particles they go down deeper into the tooth of the paper. So what we now get is we get this very, very saturated and rich look to our value, rather than, like we've said before, a very grainy, or in some cases if you've overworked the tooth of the paper, we do something called burnish the paper, and that's when you've completely flattened the tooth of the paper. What then happens is it becomes very difficult for you to take any value out, but you get a different look to it. It doesn't look as realistic, I don't feel. You might take a good photograph of your artwork and it looks real, but actually when it's hanging on a wall in a frame, you can almost see that the tooth of the paper has been damaged. So it's this constant layering process, same technique, the same stroke. One thing that I'm probably not doing as much as I would like to do, because I'm videoing this and I want you guys to be able to see as much as possible, is I'm not probably turning the paper as much as I could do. Now, my best stroke, my most accurate stroke, is pulling towards me. So what I'm doing is I'm layering with this pulling towards me action as best as I can, but I'm crisscrossing. I'm not having my stroke all in the same direction. And I have noticed a few of you over on the Facebook group, you're posting some of your early work. Some of you are complete beginners and you're just starting out with this tapered stroke technique. And I have commented a few times that a few of you, it looks like you're just laying the lines down in the same direction every time. And what that does, unless you're very, very accurate and you're laying these lines perfectly together, we can kind of see where the lines are. And again, this just breaks the reality. It doesn't, you look at somebody's face and we don't have lines going all in the same direction. We have various details in the face, but what we're talking about here is we're just laying down the base values. We add details like creases and freckles and lumps and bumps, but they are details that we add at the end or towards the end. What we're talking about here is laying down these very initial foundations, these layers. If you were drawing something that's very smooth, so a metallic type looking object, again, you don't want to have these grainy lines that we can see all over going in the same direction. So this is obviously going to be a lighter area in the forehead. And if you cast your mind back to the sphere exercise, which I believe was sort of lesson 2, lesson 3, somewhere there, we talk about any object that has a curve to it having a highlighted area. And this is because no matter where the light source is, whether it's a multiple light source or it's a singular light source, like something on a bright sunny day outside, there's always going to be one part of the object that's catching the sunlight first, or the light source first, and that's what we call your hot spot. That's what's happening in the eye there. Now this forehead is going to have that, so I'm identifying that as this area. And what that does is it tricks the mind into believing that what it's looking at is something that is rounded rather than something that's flat. Now this 2H pencil initially might look as though it's quite dark. Don't be tricked into this, it's an optical illusion. Because we're looking at white paper, any mark that isn't white, any value up from white is going to look dark. But when we start to surround this area with 2B, maybe, up in this area, even this 2H is going to look very, very pale. But what I can also do is I can start to pull out some of the value, again with the highlighter, which is the kneaded eraser. That's my highlighter for any pencil drawings that I'm doing. Hear about people working with ink using a white pen as the highlighter. Well, we don't need a white pen for this because we've got white paper, and that's just going to allow us to draw a little bit less, I guess. Okay, so I'm getting quite a nice coverage now in here, and don't be too worried if your initial layers, particularly with your harder pencils, don't be too worried if they're not absolutely smooth, and you can see some lines in there. Like I say, this process of layering and brushing, which is what I'm going to do now, so I'm using my soft brush. A makeup brush will work just fine. I'm just going to move some of that value around and then come back in now with my HB pencil. So don't be too worried if you're not getting it absolutely smooth initially. We're going to build that smoothness over some time, over the duration of the drawing. We may even take some value out. What I find is, even in some of these darker areas, when you do take some of the value out with your kneaded eraser, which I'll show you in a minute, initially it makes it look quite messy and blotchy, but the layering process of going back over it again, I feel it just gives me a slightly more smoother texture. So I am quite big on using the kneaded eraser, even if it's, like I say, it's not necessarily somewhere that I want to highlight. I might just, I guess it just conditions the paper again a little bit and possibly moves some of the graphite slightly lower down into the tooth of the paper. So now you can see, as I'm starting to build a little bit of value up in this left hand edge, it is making this area look quite light, even though we have got a good coverage there now of 2H pencil. So I'm going to try and bring out some of the contrast now on this right hand side. It's literally been raining here over in England for the last 4 days non-stop. I've had a very small respite of about an hour or two today, but yet again it's raining, so it's given me an opportunity to get some of these drawings done. And I hope you're all enjoying the videos. I know a lot of you are sending me some brilliant comments and lovely comments, and it really does make me happy when I'm seeing that some of you are starting to. There's been quite a few of you saying that you're not drawn for a long time, a number of years, and you've started watching a few of these videos and you're starting to get your desire to start drawing back. That's fantastic. That's absolutely what I want from this, and also those of you that are just starting out with drawing. You know, I've said all along that in my short time of drawing, which is three and a half years now really, I don't really count the years when I've tried to draw for the girls, a couple of cartoon characters here and there. Once I started really looking into art and the principles of portrait drawing, which is about 3.5 years ago, what I've wanted to do with this group and these videos is teach you everything, because I've had such a wonderful journey with it, and you know, I've sold work and done some fantastic pieces for people. I've met lots of really nice people, you know, through the art, and I just think that's something that everybody that wants to, and everybody that's got a desire to, deserves to. I understand not everybody can afford online lessons. I was fortunate enough to be able to do some online courses where I've learnt an awful lot. So a lot of credit to the people that I've been learning from. But what I have taken from them is snippets from one teacher, other ideas from another. I've done an awful lot of pen and ink work. I've done some coloured pencil work. I had a few people commenting on the group a few days ago about coloured pencil work, so I posted one of my earlier videos that I made a few months ago, maybe 6 or 7 months ago now, actually, thinking about the time, and it was just about how we blend coloured pencils. So again, I've dabbled in most things to do with art. I haven't jumped into doing any painting work yet. I just feel it's a little bit messy. But hey, never say never. There might be a time in my life when I have more room and my own art studio, and mess may not be much of an issue. But I'm also colourblind, which I have mentioned a few times, which is one of the reasons why I like working in pencil. The greys and the blacks work for me. I can see those subtle changes in grey, white to black, that I guess people with perfect colour vision can see those subtle hue changes in coloured work. One thing that always amazes me is working in colour, particularly colour pencils, and I guess paint as well, that we have blues in our skin tones. You know, I've watched some fantastic artists and they're starting with bases of a blue and things like that, and I just can't get my head around that, because I just cannot see where there would be a blue in the skin tone of certainly a Caucasian looking face. But I think I've seen more of the blues being used in much darker skin, so sort of African skin or Spanishy type looking skin, Mexican looking skin, and for me that's mind blowing. But I guess that's what some people can see, and that's, you know, they've got that vision for that. I tend to be able to see things in the black and white. They're not colours, are they? Black and white, or even a grey, in the shades. Let's call it. So I'm going to come back in with my 2H now. I don't love the look of this area here. What I've got is I've got a lot of lines going the same way, and it's giving a texture which is rather grainy and liney. So I'm just going to work at a slightly different angle with one of my harder pencils here, and just try and smooth it out really, without damaging the tooth of the paper. So your H pencils, you can even go down to a sort of a 4H. They're very useful for blending and smoothing out, rather than using a Q-tip or a blending stump. Still using the same pressure that we ordinarily would do, but what we're doing here is we're just kind of going over the whole area again, and just making that look of it look flawless. Same in this zone here, and straight away I can start to see this taking on the look of a curved forehead. remember, wherever the light struggles to get to is always going to be darkest. So in this area here where the hair is meeting it, no matter what direction the light's coming from, even if it was front on, this is going to be your darkest area. And it's very important that you establish those areas in your drawing. It's what makes something look realistic, even if we're drawing a cartoon. Identifying those darkest areas and really highlighting them, even on something that is as unrealistic as a cartoon character, what we start to find is we still give it a realistic look to it, so it's something that's believable. So I might be drawing a picture of Spider-Man, and although it's not an ultra-realistic pencil version, it might be in coloured inks, I still need to know where the darkest areas are. I still need to know where the light's hitting, so the highlights. So even, like I say, even in something like a cartoon that is unrealistic in itself, we can get a sense of realism and that what we're looking at has depth. I guess that's really what we're looking for, aren't we? We're looking for something that looks three-dimensional without it being one of those. And they're fantastic pieces of work. I see a lot of people on Facebook and YouTube that do these 3D arts that look like it's jumping off the page at you, and they've got these brilliant shadowed areas behind their subject. I'm not talking about that per se. What I'm looking at is giving something dimension. So this side of the cheek here is curving round, so I know that this needs to be darker. But then as it comes over into this apex of the cheekbone here, I need to make sure that that stays lighter. And then I'm just following almost my map. So I'm looking at the reference. One very important thing that I try and do as I'm drawing is I'm constantly flicking my eye from the reference image over to my drawing. I'm going to come in with some more HB now in these areas. You probably can't see this now on the screen. Let me see if I can bring the paper up, but I did mention that I really don't like using the grid method. Now, if I can bring this close enough, you can actually see the faint lines where I've had to rub out, and they're always going to be there because obviously I haven't damaged the tooth of the paper necessarily, but what I have got there is I've got an area of paper that's got less value in it than everywhere else. Now I could spend time and try to really go over those individual lines and fill them with a little bit more value. But what happens is I find it very difficult to get that to the same value and the same saturation as everything else. So that's, again, like I said to you right at the start, the grid method's fantastic for learning to draw, and it's a brilliant way for you to train your eye as to what to see, where things line up, etc. However, for a finished commission piece, I would never ever use the grid method because, call me a perfectionist, I don't want an underlying grid still being, even if it's only barely visible and maybe only visible to me because I know what I'm looking for, but I don't want that on a piece of work that somebody's paid me to do because it's not there. It's not there on their reference or the real life study that you've been doing. There isn't an underlying grid. So I don't want that there in mine. If you found a better way of getting rid of the grids, then please let me know. I don't know of any, particularly with this method of laying the pencil down. Okay, so I'm going to give that another quick brush, and then I'm going to start to come in with some 2B. And again, we're not allowing our brains to tell us that this is lighter than it's going to be in our reference. Sorry, the reference is lighter, or you know, our brain tries to play these tricks on us. So I'm not scared of bringing the 2B into play at the minute. I'm just going to define that edge again, just so that I don't lose that. If I keep adding some 2B to this area, this is always going to be ahead of this. So as I add value over the two areas, I'm still going to be bringing this up further than I'm bringing this up. And as I add this 2B, I might find that I need to go into this area with some more a 4B or whatever pencil I've got at my disposal. Might even be a little bit of 7B in there, just so that I can keep the separation between the darkest area and the lightest areas, and everything else is then going to be in between. I think it was in the last video, or possibly in the start of the project. I think this is our third video now of this project. When you're starting your drawing off, it's really important that you very quickly understand where the darkest areas are and where the lightest areas are, and you're going to keep developing them through the drawing, and that's called contrast. I'm going to keep ramping up the darkest areas whilst keeping the lightest areas light. I see a lot of drawings that are absolutely brilliant. The initial sketch is perfect. The likeness is there. They've done a great job, you know, with the blending, whether they've used blending stumps or something, or they've used this technique. But the final piece of the puzzle is they've just not pulled out enough of the darks. Everything looks a little bit wishy-washy. And you don't have to go overboard with the darks. It's just some very subtle areas. You know, certainly for this young girl's face, I'm working in some dark areas at the moment, but they're not the darkest areas on the drawing. The darkest areas are within the eye itself. It's always going to be the pupil. The pupil is always going to be very dark. And the darkest areas on this are in the hair. So this crevice that we've worked on here is very dark. There's a few other areas, and it's very important that I get them whilst keeping the light areas light, like this cheek. This is one of our lightest areas, so we've really got to work hard to keep that light. And every time I brush, I'm brushing graphite into that area, so not worrying too much about actually laying value down in there, because I know there's going to be value going in there just from my work in other areas. I use the grafwood pencils. These are called the grafwood pencils, and they're made by Caran D'ache. You can get them on Amazon. Now these are slightly softer pencils than some that I've worked with before. So the value, the graphite does tend to move around a little bit more than other pencils that I've worked with. So just be sure that you're very aware of what your pencils do and don't do. It's amazing how much moves around over the duration of a drawing, and then towards the end we have an awful lot to remove. That can also be one of the most fun stages, because that's when you really start to see your drawing standing out and almost popping off the page at you. So this is going to be my darkest area within this value range. So making sure that I've got that, and that just gives me the indication of, I guess it's an eyebrow. This girl's got very light eyebrows, so most of this, what looks like an eyebrow, is actually just the shadow from the shape of the brow. It's not actual hair. And we've got a very light area in here, so I'm just making sure that I'm conscious of that. Still using my 2B pencil, which people think's dark, but really isn't dark at all. It's the first in the B range that starts to add a little bit more value, but because we've got that very smooth base layers of 2H and HB, and in some cases you might have a little bit of 4H in there, we get a lovely smooth layer. I'm not having to fight with the graphite, I'm not having to fight with the paper. I can make small adjustments as I go along. Everything I'm doing is on purpose. At any moment I can hit rewind and I can take some of this graphite off. Now within this eyelid, here we've got a highlight. This is the bulge of the eyelid. So dark, light, going into dark again. So again, I'm trying to give myself opportunities to do that. I'm always looking for these very subtle, and it might seem nitpicky at the time, but I promise you, if you take your time with this and you really look for those opportunities, what you end up with is on another level to anything you've drawn before. And then the next drawing, try and make it a little bit better still. Even if you can just find one more opportunity at pulling something out that you were unable to do. In the last drawing, so I'm just adding some more 2B in this area here, which will then allow me to really emphasize this lovely highlighted area of the cheek. And within this darkest area, I can see this is a darker area, this is a lighter area, even though it's all darker than the surrounding cheekbone. So a little bit more of my HB now. So I'm going to start in the line of 2B, and I'm just going to then start to bring it out, because what I don't want is I don't want a line between this value and this value. There isn't a line in the reference. It's a smooth transition. So I'm going to get that by next applying some HB, which is, as long as I'm using the same pressure on the pencil, it's a level down in value from the 2B. I'll then go into the 2H, and it's that moving up and down, going over where the values meet. We did one of the very first lessons, we did the patch exercises, where what we were challenged to do was take a pencil and see if you can go from dark to very, very light, almost just fading into the paper itself. And that's precisely what we're doing here, but we're doing it with each pencil in the same area. So I've faded from 2B into nothingness, and then HB into nothingness, layering over the top, and then 2H layering into nothingness. And it's that process that then gives me wonderfully smooth transitions. And for me they are, or that is, having the ability to do that is one of the three pillars to successful drawing. Contrast, which I've mentioned already, accuracy in your initial drawing, whether that's using the divider method or straight edge method, which I'll show you, or the grid method. However you plot your drawing, whether you trace it or you use a light box, is irrelevant, because again, you can have a very accurate drawing. I spoke about this earlier on today. You can have the world's most accurate drawing. If you haven't got contrast, you haven't got smooth transitions, it doesn't look good. So I'm going to look at this area now. This area interests me now, around this mouth. It's these subtle changes in value that give our face that realistic look. We've got a lump here, a contour there, a bump there. The way that the light's catching the face is ultimately, that's what then gives us that realistic look. I've seen some brilliant drawings, but they haven't paid enough attention to the different values within the dark value. So they've just got a very regimented dark going into a light, and it almost gives it a false look, almost like it's a cyborg or a robotic sort of creation that we're looking at, that's got this plastic waxy looking skin to it. Just really paying attention to these deviations of value, and what seems like it's taking forever, and before you know it, comes to an end. That's one thing that's always amazed me with a drawing, is very often I don't know, as I sit down to draw, whatever stage I'm at. So I'm nearing the end of a drawing, but I have no idea that I'm going to finish it, and then I finish it and I look at it and I think, that's finished now, that's done. Yet when I sat down with it to start with, my intentions weren't, I'm going to finish this now today. More often than not, when I've thought that, I've ended up getting nowhere near finishing it and having to have another couple of sessions on it. But I don't know if any of you find that you sit down with a drawing and then before you know where you are, it's kind of finished without knowing it. You just sort of look at it and go, hey, that's done now. I'm finished with that. I guess it's because we see it build up so gradually with this method. And the other thing is as well, and I remember right in the very early days, somebody said to me, there's a famous quote, I'm not entirely sure who it's by, and it says art is never finished, it's just abandoned. And I absolutely get that. You know, I look at any of my drawings that I've completed, and if you sat me down with a spare hour, I could fill that, just fine touches, refining this, refining that, making this darker, bringing a highlight out more there. And I think you could literally do that with any of your drawings. So you get to a stage where you go, okay, I'm happy enough with that now. Could I spend another hour on it? Probably. But am I happy with that? You know, have I got all of the elements in there? Have I got enough detail in there to make it look good? Have I balanced my values? Can I see the darkest areas in contrast to the lightest areas? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the kneaded eraser and I'm just going to start to pull a little bit of the value out. So I'm going to roll this into a board. There's a few of you who've been asking questions about how we clean these rubbers, these kneaded erasers. I just pull it apart, fold it over a few times, and it's almost like you've got a new eraser. Really important when you're taking the value out. I like to make a ball, and I will make a point at one end just to take some finer details out, but I'm going to use the rounded edge, and because it's not a flat edge, it allows me to sort of taper out towards the darkest areas so that I'm not having an abrupt finish to it. So some in this forehead now, and I can see straight away now that this value is lifting off beautifully because I haven't damaged the paper. Haven't damaged the tooth of the paper. I always give it another brush afterwards, and then what we have to do is I like to go back in now with my 2H and again just start to blend from the darker areas, just taking away some of those. You do almost get a slightly blotchy look to it. That can't be helped. It's just the nature of using the kneaded eraser and just bouncing it. But I certainly, once I've taken those initial layers out with the kneaded eraser, the paper feels different to me. So this it's starting to feel different now. The strokes of my paper start to feel as though they're, I don't know, almost gliding on the paper better now. And I guess that's because what I've started to do is I've started to fill, I've taken initial layers of value away from the very top, but I guess what the kneaded eraser, the bouncing the kneaded eraser does is it pushes a little bit of value deeper down into the lower pits of the tooth. So I'm just making sure with this 2H pencil that I haven't got any harsh lines going into the lightest area. I might give that another brush. And then I'm going to do exactly the same over in this forehead. So, you're just looking at the time again and we're up to sort of 45 minutes. I can't believe how quickly the time goes. So what I'm really going to do now is I'm going to keep repeating the process that we've just been going through. So I'm going to really keep ramping up these darker areas with my 2H, using the 2B, ramping those darker areas up with the 2B. I'm going to be layering up through the 2B into the HB and some of this 2H as well. I'm not going to start the hair just yet. I want us to be at the same stage. So when we see each other next, I'm going to have most of these values down in this face now. I'm not going to say it's going to be completed because, like we've mentioned before in videos, once we start adding the hair, we then see, and quite often you see that you've not gone dark enough in some areas. That then gives us the contrast, and we see that we need to add more value in certain areas. So we're going to bring this face up to a level that we're happy with. We've not left any gaping gaps, and we have got smooth transitions and we've got contrast in there, but we're not going to say it's complete until we add the hair. So I'm going to leave you with that. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn the notifications bell on. That means you'll get notified whenever I do release a new video. Don't forget to come and join and make yourself known over on the Facebook page. That's called Tutorial Tuesdays Beginner to Pro. We're a really friendly group with some nice friendly chat and help on there. And I'm going to continue with this. I'll probably do another hour on this, and that will bring me up to a decent level. And I will see you guys in the next video. Stay in touch. Thanks so much for your support so far, and I look forward to seeing some of your progress. Thanks very much. See you in the next video. Hit subscribe, smack the notifications button, follow me on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter.